Another top 10 guard in the 2025 recruiting class is planning to visit Gonzaga as Mark Few looks to reload after this upcoming season.
You are Locked On Zags, your daily podcast on the Gonzaga Bulldogs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, folks? Happy Thursday. Welcome into the Locked On Zags podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I am your host and longtime Gonzaga podcaster, Andy Patton, here to bring you news and updates on all things Zag athletics. Today's episode of Locked On Zags is brought to you by FanDuel. Folks, make every moment more. Right now, new customers will get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $150 win or lose. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon today to get started. Well, folks, we are finally continuing our season in review series, talking about every player on Gonzaga's roster, taking a look at their history, taking a look at their role projected for next season and their future at Gonzaga basketball. We are going to talk about Braden Huff today in the second and third segments, but we lead the show with the announcement. I saw it from Theo Lawson on Twitter. I was reported by 24/7 Sports that five-star prospect Jaylen Harrelson in the 2025 class is planning to take a visit to Spokane. Now, there weren't dates, not like what we talked about earlier this week with Davis Fogel, he's a four-star prospect in the 2025 class, but another guard prospect that Gonzaga is interested in. We know he is coming to Spokane for Hoop Fest weekend in late June. Harrelson just said he was naming schools that are on his list. He's had a top 9 for a while. Gonzaga has been part of that top 9. They were one of the schools on that list that he had not visited, which is part of the reason that he wasn't a prospect that we were giving a ton of airtime to. The kind of Zag Twitter sphere wasn't really talking a lot about Jaylen Harrelson because he didn't seem like a super likely prospect to end up at Gonzaga. He's from Indiana, but he has now confirmed that Gonzaga is one of the schools that he would like to visit. He had some nice quotes to say about the program. I'll talk a little bit about who he is first. He's a 6'6", five-star guard from Anderson, Indiana. Currently, he is the 11th ranked prospect in the 2025 recruiting class that is using On3's composite rankings. Those composite rankings take an average of the 4 major recruiting services rankings, including On3, where he is 13th, including 24/7 Sports, where he is 11th, ESPN, where he is 12th, and Rivals, where he is 8th. Lot of consistency with how Jaylen Harrelson is being regarded in this 2025 recruiting class. He is frequently similarly regarded as Isaiah Harwell, another guard Gonzaga is pursuing in the 2025 recruiting class as well. This does not have any indication on whether the staff is still pursuing Harwell. They are interested in both players. Harrelson was just a guy who hadn't been super on the radar because he hadn't set up any kind of visit to Gonzaga. He hadn't really talked publicly about the interest in Gonzaga. Like I said, he had listed a top 9 with Gonzaga in it, and the Zags made an offer to him. It was just a long time ago. It was way back in June of 2023, about 11 months ago as we're recording this here, close to about a year ago, depending when in June that offer came through. But he's been kind of on the background of the radar for Gonzaga for a long time. But now that there is a confirmed, at least, interest on his side of coming to campus and visiting, and presumably an interest for Gonzaga for getting him out to campus, this certainly is starting to pick up at least a little bit of steam in terms of a player who could potentially end up playing for the Zags next year. This is the quote that he said in this article from 24/7 Sports. He said, quote, regarding Gonzaga, he said, "They run a lot of high-level stuff offensively, and I feel like they're one of the best offenses in the country every year, every single year. Mark Few is one of the best coaches in the country." Can't argue with any of that, Mr. Harrelson. Very astute observations there. And like I said, Harrelson has cut his list to 9. The 9 schools that were on his list, this was revealed in March, so about 2 months ago. He said Gonzaga, as well as Auburn, Indiana, his home state, Duke, Kansas, those are some pretty good schools right there. Purdue, they're doing all right. Notre Dame, Michigan State, and Missouri. So a lot of local ties to the Indiana area, of course, with Purdue and Notre Dame and Indiana all on the list. Some other Big Ten schools, some other fantastic programs, Duke and Kansas. Anytime you're on a list with them, you got to feel pretty good. He's already visited 4 of these 9 schools: Auburn, Purdue, Indiana, and Notre Dame. So again, the 3 local schools in the state of Indiana, as well as Auburn. And he has indicated in this article, when he talked about Gonzaga, that he plans to also visit Gonzaga and Duke and Kansas and Missouri. So What I'm gathering out of this, more than perceived interest in Gonzaga, is that I think Michigan State's probably out. He is a top 9 that he came up with back in March, and he's visited 4 of the schools. He's planning to visit the other 4. Maybe he left Michigan State off accidentally in the conversation. Maybe he is no longer interested in going to Michigan State. Maybe they're no longer recruiting him for whatever reason. But it sounds like basically the read here is that the list of 9 has gone to 8. So it's not like Gonzaga's odds have dramatically increased. Having said that, you're unlikely to land a player who's from across the country who's never been to your campus. Doesn't happen very often. So for Gonzaga, in order to have any chance of landing Jaylen Harrelson, again, a 6'6" guard wing, very talented, explosive athlete, kind of in that mold of a lot of the players that Gonzaga has really been pursuing in future recruiting classes. They're looking at bigger guards. Harwell's 6'5". Davis Fogel went from 6'5" to 6'7". Nick Kamini is more of a forward, but he's about 6'8". Like Gonzaga is pursuing bigger guards. And that is the kind of mold that we have with Jaylen Harrelson, and a player who obviously, at least in some capacity, is truly interested in coming out to Gonzaga. He's completely correct that Mark Few is one of the best coaches in the country and that they run this high-octane offense. And I think as long as Gonzaga is continuing to score 90-plus points per game, continuing to run and gun and get out and let their guards have some freedom offensively, you're going to get interest. And it doesn't mean you're going to land every commit. No school does. But you're going to keep being on these lists. And you're going to keep having quotes come out there where high-level high school recruits are saying good things about your program. At the end of the day, that's great. That's great. If Jaylen Harrelson doesn't come to Gonzaga, the fact that he considered Gonzaga, especially if he does come to campus, if he comes to campus and decides to commit elsewhere, the fact that Gonzaga brought this kid on campus, the fact that he saw the facilities, it could help down the line if he were to ever transfer, certainly, but it also just helps general awareness. Other high schoolers who are, maybe competed against him are going to be more interested in Gonzaga, whereas in, Anderson, Indiana, they may not be all that familiar with Gonzaga. So it's never a bad thing to have a player showing interest and saying nice things about your program, regardless of how likely it necessarily may be for them to come to campus. Right now, On3 is giving Indiana the highest odds of landing him. That makes sense. He's visited Indiana. He's been pursued by Indiana. He's from Indiana. Makes a lot of sense that they would be in the front there. Auburn is also very high on the list, and I think that makes sense too. Again, when he's visited 4 schools, 3 of them are in-state and one of them is not. I've said this on the show before. I'll say it again. If something stands out when you're looking at a recruiting profile, when you're looking at a top list, if there's a program that stands out, that usually it's not nothing. So Auburn feels like they probably are in a good spot right now because he's already visited there. He's gone out of the state to go check that campus out. But of course, if he also visits Duke and Kansas and Gonzaga, suddenly that conversation may change a little bit. Gonzaga's been involved in 2025 recruits. We talked about Davis Fogel earlier this week. He's a 6'7" guard from Anacortes, Washington, going to play at Compass Prep in Arizona next year. He has officially received an offer from Gonzaga. He's going to visit in late June over Hoop Fest weekend. Lots of other good programs involved in his recruitment as well. Creighton, Kansas, Nebraska, St. Mary's has been in the mix for Fogel as well. We mentioned Isaiah Harwell and Nick Kamini, 2 players that have already been to campus. Kamini has been a couple of times. His official visit was last year at Craziness in the Kennel. He was here the previous year for an unofficial visit, also for Craziness in the Kennel. Harwell was here in February, I think the February 24th, whatever date Gonzaga played Santa Clara at home. That was the day he was here. He's been injured, so I don't know how much that has impacted his recruitment. I know Kentucky's now in the mix. North Carolina is in the mix for Harwell as well. So Harwell's been a Gonzaga lean for a long time. Same with Nick Kamini, and neither of them have committed yet. Again, I don't think that Harrelson talking about coming to visit necessarily means anything about Isaiah Harwell or Nick Kamini, because again, Gonzaga offered Harrelson a year ago, so this isn't really new interest from the staff, but certainly every day that goes by where Harwell and Kamini haven't committed, I know that that's going to raise some angst amongst the fan base. I'm not overly concerned about it yet. Kamini said he wants to commit by September. I imagine that Isaiah Harwell will want to be committed by then as well. So we'll see between those two, between Fogel, between Jaylen Harrelson. We'll kind of see what combination of those players end up in Spokane. And once we have that, we'll, of course, have a better glance at what the future is going to look like for Gonzaga outside of this upcoming season. Well, I want to switch gears, talk about Braden Huff, because, folks, Braden Huff immediately took Zag Nation by storm last season, but some inconsistency plagued the big man in his first season of college basketball action, and we're going to talk about that in just a second. But first, I want to tell you all about today's sponsor, Yahoo Finance. You all know, you're listening to the podcast, you know that I love stats, that I love numbers, that I love data, and it doesn't just apply to sports. I also enjoy keeping tabs on how all of my investments are doing. And I used to track it all by myself on a bunch of different spreadsheets using just a bunch of different data, and it was confusing and exhausting. And frankly, I got tired of doing it. So I talked to my financial advisor and they suggested using Yahoo Finance, a one-stop shop to keep track of all my finances in just one location. And for more than 25 years, Yahoo Finance has been the brand behind every great investor. Whether you're a seasoned investor or just looking for some extra guidance, Yahoo Finance gives you the tools and the data that you need all in one place. You can securely link your brokerage accounts for a unified view of your wealth, including 401k and your other investments. A comprehensive perspective is what sets apart great investors, and it's how Yahoo Finance ensures you have the insight to look at your wealth in its entirety. With a community of over 90 million users every single month, their real strength is helping you on your way to financial success. For comprehensive financial news and analysis, visit the brand behind every great investor, yahoofinance.com. The number one financial destination. Once again, that is yahoofinance.com. All right, folks, moving on to our season in review episode, talking Braden Huff. We've done 5 or 6 of these already. We did one for Jun-Suk Yeo. We've done one for Ben Gregg. We did one for Dusty Stromer. Done it with Nolan Hickman. We've done it with Anton Watson, of course. But we haven't been able to get to him in a while because, well, there's been news. There's been recruiting updates. There's been transfer portal updates with Battle and Inocente. There's been NBA draft combine updates with Michael Ajayi. There's been a whole conference realignment that took up an entire week of content with Grand Canyon and Seattle U joining the WCC. So lots and lots and lots of news here. There is a constant 24/7 news cycle in college basketball these days. It's great. As a college basketball content creator, don't get me twisted. I am not complaining whatsoever, but it has put this series kind of on the back burner a little bit. We haven't been able to get into the season in review as much as we would have liked to, but we're getting back to it today. We're going to talk Braden Huff. In this segment, we're going to talk about his history up until he got to Gonzaga, and then we're going to talk about how last season went for him, and then we're going to close out the show talking about what his role will look like next year, and then maybe what his future looks like in the program and potentially at the next level as well. So Braden Huff, when he was recruited, he was a 6'10" forward from Glenbard West High School in Illinois. He committed to Gonzaga back in September of 2021. That feels like a long time ago that Braden Huff initially committed to Gonzaga. And at the time, it was not a particularly oft-discussed recruitment. He wasn't a top 100 prospect. He wasn't a name that was, not like the names we're talking about now with Harwell and Kamenia and those guys. He wasn't a super talked about prospect. Again, I don't think there was a single recruiting outlet that had him top 100 when he first committed to Gonzaga in September of 2021. Granted, I think I started as the host of Locked On Zags in October of 2021, so I just missed Braden Huff's actual commitment. But he went ahead and had a phenomenal senior season of basketball. He was Mr. Illinois. Legitimately voted the best high school basketball player in the state of Illinois. Chicago is a basketball hotbed, so to be the best player in the state of Illinois is a pretty tremendous accomplishment for Braden Huff. And ultimately, it did move him up in some recruiting services, but he still never really got a ton of love as a high school prospect. He was 156th in the class of 2022 using On3's composite rankings. On3 themselves had him 148th. Whereas 24/7, they kind of adjusted a little quicker. They had him 88th. ESPN snuck him into their top 100 at 96, and he was unranked at Rivals. I'm not sure if Rivals does 100 or 150 different players that they rank, but regardless, they did not have him among those players. So then Braden Huff shows up to campus for the 2022-23 season. Drew Timmy's final year. Anton Watson was a senior. Ben Gregg was in the mix. The Zags had added Efton Reed. And so Braden Huff redshirted. I don't know at what point that was the specific plan for Braden Huff, but immediately it became clear that he was going to redshirt for that season. And then, of course, Ben Gregg ended up kind of stealing some playing time from Efton Reed as the year went on. Drew Timme said he was done after the year. He wasn't going to use his COVID year. Anton Watson did use his COVID year, but with Drew Timme out of the mix, with Ben Gregg stepping into a bigger role, Efton Reed hit the transfer portal, and that cleared an opportunity for Braden Huff to step into a bigger role during his actual first season. What is unclear is whether Efton Reed transferred in part because he knew what the Zags had in Braden Huff. Because as soon as the season ended for Gonzaga, as soon as they lost to UConn, the exit interviews, a lot of the conversations, Drew Timme said, you guys are in great hands because of Braden Huff. He mentioned other players too, obviously, but he specifically called out Braden Huff by name. So did Anton Watson. So did Julian Straffer. And if I've said this on the show before, and I'll say it again here too, look for the context of when players or coaches bring up players. If you specifically ask a question, hey, Mark Few, what do you think about Ben Gregg? And he gives you a positive answer, great, but he was specifically prompted. If you say, who are players you're looking forward to seeing, or just what do you think about the team next year? And the player responds unprompted and brings up somebody like Braden Huff, you kind of want to file that away. That might mean a little bit more. And that was kind of the case here. It's like everybody's bringing up Braden Huff. Clearly they know that this guy is good. They're the only people who've seen him. We haven't seen him. But what we do know is that players who spend a year redshirting in Gonzaga's system almost always come out of it really, really good. Kelly Olynyk, Kyle Wiltshire, Brandon Clark, Nigel Williams-Goss, Jonathan Williams. The list goes on and on and on and on. It is a proven track record of success. If you redshirt at Gonzaga, you come out of it a very positive, immediate, instant contributor. And that's what I want to talk about, because Braden Huff was an instant contributor for Gonzaga. It is unbelievable how quickly he was ready to play for this team. On the season, 35 games, played about 13 and a half minutes per game, averaged 9 points, 3.5 boards, just under a block a game. The numbers don't pop in a super significant way when you look at them in the scope of a full season. And that's because there was a lot of ups and downs. There was a lot of great games. There was a lot of games where he barely played. 5 minutes, 6 minutes, 0 points. And that just is going to kind of drag the season numbers down to being a little bit more, for lack of a better word, pedestrian. Now, the efficiency was phenomenal. Braden Huff in his full first season for Gonzaga shot 70.1% on two-pointers. That is elite. That is Drew Timme levels of efficiency as a two-point scorer. It's better than Anton Watson, who was phenomenal as a two-point scorer. That is, 70% is elite. He was also 34% from three. Not elite, but also not bad. And it was on just under 2 attempts per game. He was a decent volume for a guy who played 14 minutes a game. 2 attempts a game is pretty good. 34% for a 6'10" guy, pretty good. He was also 55.5% from the free throw line, definitely an area that we want to see some growth. But Huff's season doesn't really, it's hard to evaluate it just looking at the overall numbers, because that's not really what happened. What happened is that Braden Huff hit the ground running faster than almost any freshman I've ever seen in a Gonzaga basketball uniform. Craziness in the kennel, he popped off. The exhibition game against Lewis Clark State, he popped off. And we kept wondering, is he just going to keep doing this? And then the season started, and the answer was, yeah, he is going to keep doing this. His first game at first Division I basketball game for Gonzaga, 19 points, 9 boards on 7 of 10 shooting against Yale, a team that made the NCAA tournament and won a game. He played 20 minutes in that game, 19 and 9 in 20 minutes against an NCAA tournament team. What an introduction to college basketball for Braden Huff. Next game, yes, it was against an NAIA school in Eastern Oregon. There's a caveat that's important to acknowledge there, but he had 23 points on 11 of 14 shooting, folks, in 14 minutes. Ridiculous. He also hung 19 points and 7 boards on Arkansas Pine Bluff. That was in 15 minutes on 8 of 9 shooting. He had 17 against both Missouri Valley State and Jackson State, with 7 of 9 in each of those games. Braden Huff was awesome to start the year against primarily not good teams, Yale being the counter example. When Braden Huff and the Zags played good teams early in the year, they struggled. Braden Huff included. The whole team struggled, so I don't want to just pin it on him, but he did not perform well in those early season games against marquee opponents. That's not surprising or unexpected or concerning. It's just a fact. 6 points, 6 boards on 2 of 6 shooting against Purdue. He had 0 points and 3 fouls in 6 minutes against UCLA. He had 0 points and 3 fouls in 5 minutes at Washington. He had 1 point on 0 of 4 shooting in 13 minutes against UConn. I think he also had 2 points against San Diego State. Those big marquee games that Gonzaga played early in the year, Braden Huff didn't really show up. He was fine against USC. He was fine against Syracuse. He had some decent games in there. But the games where the majority of the team struggled, Braden Huff also struggled. Again, not really exactly a shocker. But then as we got into conference play, the performance was still a little bit inconsistent. We had some incredible highs and some just disappearing acts from Braden Huff. Part of that was just Gonzaga riding the hot hand. If Graham Ike just went crazy and didn't get in foul trouble and was able to play 32 minutes, Braden Huff only plays 5 or 6 minutes. That's not really his fault. It's just a thing that ended up happening. But we see Braden Huff have 26 points at San Diego. We see him have 25 points at home against Portland. We see him put up 17 points in just 12 minutes against Pacific. But then we also have eight WCC games where he had 5 or less points. 4 of them were in a row in late February. There was some significant disappearing from Braden Huff. Again, some of it just play style and just the matchups didn't really allow him to play all that much. Some of it was probably just him hitting a freshman wall, especially with 4 of those games coming at the end of the season. That's not uncommon for freshmen to just get worn down. It's the longest basketball season they've ever played. They're traveling, they're away from home. It's just difficult. I know he's a redshirt, but he didn't travel with the team as a freshman, so this was all new to him. Comes into the NCAA tournament, is fine. 7 points and 3 boards on 3 of 7 shooting against McNeese in 15 minutes. 11 points in 18 minutes against Kansas on 4 of 9 shooting. He had 4 points in 10 minutes on 2 of 3 shooting in that loss to Purdue. So we finished the season with Braden Huff being a very valuable low-minute backup center. And we look ahead to what next season is going to look like. And as much as you'd kind of expect a player like that to really explode and be in the conversation for like the nation's most improved player, a la Donovan Clingan, who was a small usage, highly efficient freshman center at UConn who stepped into a bigger role as a sophomore. The problem is that at UConn, Adama Sanogo left. Graham Ike is not going anywhere. So what does that mean for Braden Huff in his sophomore year? And what does it mean for Braden Huff's future in Spokane and in a Gonzaga Bulldogs uniform? We're going to talk about that in just a second. Right after I tell you about today's sponsor, FanDuel. Folks, it is playoff time in the NBA and NHL. Baseball is in full swing, and FanDuel is your place to bet on every single game. Right now, new customers will get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $150 win or lose. So bet on everything from slap shots to home runs to game-winning shots from Andrew Nembhard, all on an app that is safe, secure, and super easy to use. Check out the Celtics-Pacers lines if you want to get involved in that Andrew Nembhard sweepstakes. Also, Gonzaga currently plus 1,800 odds to win the national championship in 2025. I've been saying it on here. Those odds are not going to get any better for you in terms of a return on your investment. So it is now is the time to go check out those betting lines. Go to FanDuel.com/lockedon and make your first bet an automatic W. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. All right, folks, closing out the show, continuing our season in review series here on Braden Huff. Talked about his history, how he ended up in a Gonzaga uniform, redshirting his first year, and then blossoming into a very valuable backup center for Gonzaga last season. And we're going to look ahead towards his role in this upcoming year, and frankly, it looks pretty much the same. That's true of a lot of players for the Gonzaga Bulldogs next year. Ryan Nembhard's role is going to probably be the same. Graham Ike's, Ben Gregg's, Nolan Hickman's probably going to be the same. There's a few guys who it might shift. Dusty Stromer's role is going to be a little bit different. But that's kind of it. I mean, Steele Venters didn't have a role last year, so I guess his will be different, but it's kind of what they were expecting him to do. This is the nice thing about Gonzaga having continuity coming into the year. Now they have some key pieces coming in like Caleb Battle, who's going to impact playing time for some of the guards. Emmanuel Innocente, who's probably not going to impact much of the playing time going forward. Mike Ajayi, who definitely fills that Anton Watson role in a way that I don't think dramatically impacts the playing time for a lot of other guys. For Braden Huff in particular, he is the backup center. He backs up Graham Ike. And in fact, if you look at their numbers per game last year, I think Graham Ike was like 25 and a half minutes per game and Braden Huff is 13 and a half minutes per game. You add that up, it's pretty darn close to 40. It's a pretty good indication that if one of those guys was on the floor, the other one wasn't, and vice versa. Not always true. They did play together at times, and certainly Gonzaga ran some lineups without either of them on the floor. But by and large, Gonzaga had either Graham Ike or Braden Huff on the floor in the 5 spot. And I think that's going to be the plan again next year. And if Graham Ike can avoid foul trouble, which was the main reason he only played about 25 and a half minutes per game last year, was because there was a lot of times where he picked up 2 fouls in the first 6 minutes of the game and then sat for 14 minutes. That's how you end up playing only 26 minutes a game or less. So if that changes, and it might, there will be games where Graham Ike gets in foul trouble. It's just a part of the deal with big men, and he's a very aggressive big man, and so that happens to him. So I think you're going to see Braden Huff more or less fill the same role. I think Mark Few is going to trust him a little bit more. You're going to see that kind of sophomore leap. He already sort of took it as a red shirt, but you're going to see continued growth. Now that he has a season under his belt, the improvement that you can go from year to year is even more pronounced. So I think you're going to see some significant growth from him, but he's not going to pass Graham Ike on the depth chart. So I think the role that we expect for him is still pretty much the same. There are a few slight changes. I do think there's an opportunity for there to be more Graham Ike and Braden Huff minutes, mainly because Gonzaga is losing one of their bigs. Anton Watson was played most of his minutes at the 4 last year, although in the second half of the year, it was when him and Greg were on the floor, it was kind of, I think Watson was kind of the 3, especially defensively, because he defended away from the rim. Offensively, I think Greg was a little bit more of the 3, but regardless, Michael Ajayi is more clearly a 3. I do think Ajayi will play some small ball 4. And I do think the addition of Caliph Battle will put Gonzaga in situations where they run more 3-guard lineups. When they're running 3-guard lineups, I don't expect it to be Hickman, Nembhard, Battle, and then Huff and Ike. That would be, I don't think they would do that. It's kind of, you don't really have enough wings on the floor. Everybody's either a guard or a center. So I think if they're doing that, they're probably going to have Ajayi playing the 4. They might have Ben Gregg playing the 4. It limits it to being one of either Ike or Huff. So I think generally, if I was making a prediction, and I did this on Monday's show or Tuesday's show, might have been I did it on the show earlier this week, talking about the minutes projections for each player. I think I had Huff at like 15 to 16 minutes per game. So only a slight bump from where he was last year. And part of that is hoping that he avoids foul trouble. He had a few games where he played 5 minutes because he picked up 3 fouls. And those are things that he's just going to get naturally better at that. He's going to avoid that going forward. And I think if Graham Ike avoids foul trouble, that could cut into his minutes a little bit. But I also think we'll see a little bit more of those 2 guys playing together. Not a ton, but a little bit more. What does that mean for Braden Huff's future outside of next season? Because Braden Huff has 3 years of eligibility left. He's got next season. He's got 2 years after that. Ike has next season and a year after that if he chooses to use it. It's obviously way too early for us to know what Graham Ike is going to do. But if he were to play at Gonzaga for this upcoming season, will be his 5th year in college basketball. If he chooses to come back, which again, he has the eligibility to do because of a medical redshirt, that would be his 6th year of college basketball. I don't know if he's going to want to do that. He's probably not an NBA player just because stylistically he doesn't really fit the modern NBA. He's not a bunch of a floor spacer. He's not a great defender in space. So I don't think that he's like, maybe he gets a look, but I don't think he's going to be like, hey, we're for sure drafting you, so you got to come out kind of thing. So maybe he does return to school. Maybe the NIL money is good enough. Maybe he just wants to keep building that legacy and stay at Gonzaga. But there's also a very real chance that Graham Ike is about to play his last year at Gonzaga. And we also know that Ben Gregg is about to play his last year at Gonzaga because he's out of eligibility. Same with Michael Ajayi. Same with the guards, which isn't really super relevant to Braden Huff specifically, but this team's going to look a lot different after this upcoming season. Potentially 4 of their 5 starters are going to be gone. Actually, potentially all 5 of their starters are going to be gone. If Ike stays, Braden Huff either slides into the starting power forward spot and they actually try to do twin towers and have those guys both playing at the same time, or he stays as the backup big. It's hard to know what he'd want to do. If Graham Ike leaves, which is kind of what I'm leaning towards is the more likely outcome. Again, still a long ways away from having to make that decision. But if Graham Ike leaves, Braden Huff pretty much immediately steps into the starting center role. I don't think Gonzaga goes out and pursues a starting center to add to the roster. Obviously, if Graham Ike leaves and they don't have anybody in the pipeline like a recruit, they will go add bigs in the portal. They just won't add somebody who's going to start over Braden Huff, I don't think. I think the plan is for Braden Huff to step into a starting role after this upcoming season, unless Graham Ike comes back. So that's kind of the plan there. And then obviously he's got a couple more years after that. The main question for Huff is, does he become a guy who leaves early for the NBA draft? He obviously could enter the transfer portal. Any player could. You never know if that's going to happen. I don't see it as being particularly likely considering how strong his development has been here. It'd be risky to go somewhere else where maybe you're not going to develop as much as you are at Gonzaga. But again, you never know. More than likely, Huff is going to step into a bigger role 2 years from now or next year after if Ike leaves. But what I really want to know is what the NBA future looks like for Braden Huff. Because, Drew Timme doesn't make it, and Graham Ike is probably not going to make it, and a lot of Gonzaga's like more traditional bigs who have had prolific careers in college. Filip Petrusev before him, he was only here for a couple of years, but he was really, really good when he was here, like Shemek Karnowski. Like a lot of Gonzaga's bigs haven't made the NBA because they don't play the modern style. Braden Huff does. It's in some ways. He's still a very good low post back to the basket scorer with exceptional footwork and touch around the rim. Those are skills that are very valuable in college, and they are less valuable in the NBA. But he also can step out and shoot the three. And he's shown at least some ability to put the ball on the deck. That's an area he needs to improve. His ball handling needs to improve. If he cannot attack a closeout from the three-point line, he's going to get defended in ways where he's not going to get open looks from three. You have to be able to, and like Chet Holmgren's phenomenal at this. He's phenomenal at pretty much everything. But if somebody attacks a closeout at Chet, he can pump fake, put the ball on the deck, and be dunking it within a step because he's so long, he's so athletic, he's able to do that. Braden Huff needs to improve in that area. He also needs to improve pretty dramatically defensively. I think Braden Huff showed improvement from game 1 to game 35 last year. He showed improvement physically. He was stronger. His footwork was better. He got in positions better. He handled pick and rolls better. But at the end of the day, he went from pretty bad defensively at the beginning of the year to less bad at the end of the year. He still has issues to work on. Some of his communication stuff with teammates. Some of it is just footwork stuff. Some of it is just like pattern recognition and just understanding game plans and things that young bigs struggle with. Foul trouble, pretty common one for young bigs as well. Braden Huff will improve. He will get less foul prone. He will communicate better defensively. His footwork will improve. His hedging screens will improve. He's already pretty good at that. But he needs to get to a pretty high level to be an NBA player. Because, again, Drew Timme was such an exceptional scorer, but because he wasn't good enough defensively, he barely got sniffs. And that might change for Drew. He obviously got hurt at the end of his time with the Wisconsin Herd in the G League. Maybe he'll get a look next summer, but the defense is the kicker. And then the three-point shooting. Drew Timme never shot 34% from three. Again, we're just going to keep using the Drew Timme comps. Braden Huff did that last year. If he shoots 36, 37, 38% from three and improves the volume, he shoots 3-4 attempts per game, shoots 38%. That's pretty much where Ben Gregg is. And I mentioned Ben Gregg as a potential NBA candidate as well. Braden Huff's taller. He's a little bit bigger. There's a real chance that Braden Huff becomes an NBA player. I don't really see him as like a early entry candidate necessarily, but again, he could spend 4 years here and it would be his junior year technically because he redshirted. And if he wants to get his degree in 4 years and go to the NBA and teams are interested in him, I could see that happening. I don't see Braden Huff as like a future lottery pick in the NBA, but I could see him being a guy who sneaks into the draft and ends up carving out an NBA career. Wouldn't surprise me at all based on the skill set that he has, the amount of improvement we saw from him from year one, or from the start of year one to the end of year one, the perceived improvement that we could see going forward for him could absolutely put him in the conversation as an NBA player in the future. It's going to wrap it up for us today here on the Locked On Zags podcast. Thank you so much to those of you who have made the show your first listen or your first watch of the day. Shout out to those everyday listeners. Shout out to those of you on the Discord channel as well. If you want to join us, there is a link in the show notes. We're hanging out talking Zag hoops 24/7. We'll be back later this week with one more show talking a little bit more about Gonzaga's new addition, Emmanuel Innocente, as well as WCC realignment. All that coming up on Friday. Thanks again. And until then, as always, go Zags.